Good morning, all of you. I am Dr. Suraiya Shahin, and today I will teach you a short story called Three Blind Men Describe an Elephant. It is a short story by E. Santosh Kumar. Let me tell about the writer of this short story. E. Santosh Kumar is one of the leading contemporary Malayalam writers, born in 1969 in Kerala. We find his creative genius mainly in two genres of writing, that is novels and short stories. He received many prestigious awards like Kerala Sahitya Academy Award and others. If I talk about the short story, the writer has used first person point of view and therefore he used I throughout the story. The narrator is the main character in this story and the plot of the story proceeds from his point of view. He interacts closely with the other characters of the story. So we as readers get to know what only the narrator tells us. If I talk about the characters of the story, there are four main characters. First is Kuruvila, a journalist, and he is the narrator of the story. And there are three blind men, and they are Shekhar, Raghuraman, and Chandran. There are three blind men in this short story. All the characters in this short story are static. Actually, they don't go through any change in this story. There is an old loss where the narrator and the three blind men stayed. If I talk about the background of the story, it starts with the introduction of Kuruvila, who is a journalist who didn't like India, especially he didn't like the standards of Indian media. The narrator and his colleague try hard to come up with stories with many salvage them. Now I talk about the conflict of the story. Every human being doesn't think over empathy or develop such kind of humanity inside the heart. For any person to be able to feel what someone else feels, one should have the capacity to interpret the situation the way it will be interpreted by that person. It is not easy to feel the pain of others. It is not easy to feel the pain of others, what the writer is trying to say here. It is really more difficult to imagine and experience the challenges of life. In the similar way, we find the conflict of this story. The story starts with the confusion of the narrator about how the three blind men lived together. As the narrator says, I was baffled. Three blind men living together on the second floor without any assistance from anyone else. Who were they? How did they become a threesome? So these were the questions coming into the mind of the narrator about the three blind men who were living in the same house. So the narrator didn't know about the background of these three blind men who were living together on the second floor. There are three events in this story. In the first event of the story, the narrator, being confused, went back to his room and decided the three blind men as the subject of his project. So he assumed the topic concerning the life of three blind men, their livelihood, accommodation and food, their conversation. But the risk of being ridiculed by Kuruvila again on the Indian media standards was high. It was then that the old proverb, just as the blind saw the elephant, came to his mind. So he wanted to give a title of his project about the description of the elephant. So in the second event, the three blind men were fond of cricket while the narrator was wandering in the city without any definite destination. He saw them among the crowd in the front of the TV showroom one day when there was a cricket match. The blind men couldn't have seen the match, but since they were fond of cricket, they could have enjoyed the match by listening to the commentary. This intrigued the narrator all the more, and that's why he thought of interviewing the three blind men once again. So the narrator wanted to interview these three blind men. So while the narrator wanted in the event 3, while the narrator wanted to know about the three blind men ideas of an elephant, he continuously kept thinking about the capabilities, about how the three blind men managed everything. He expressed his perplexities about the room and the arrangement, the way the three blind men kept inside their room. He says, the narrator says, I opened the door, the room was well lit. A high power bulb was being used, presumably to overcome the low voltage problem plaguing the city. Three walking sticks leaning in a far corner in beautiful symmetry. So the narrator was figuring out in his mind the importance of light in their room as well as how they managed to keep everything in their room in proper order. Okay, so now I talk about the crux of the story. The key point of the story highlights the narrator's thirst for the answers to the questions in his mind with the coming time. His thirst for the answers gets quenched as according to the time. The narrator interviews the three blind men. He asks the question, three blind men, and the question is, how does an elephant look like according to them? Do they have any experience with an elephant? So on the question of the narrator, on the question of the interviewer, who was Kruvila, Shekhar, one of the three blind men, responds. He says, for me, elephant is that gigantic movement and a series of episodes that followed, such as the musical instruments falling silent, people here and there, and the uncomfortable silence that surrounded him. Now it was the turn of Raghu Raman, the second blind man, and the interviewer turned to Raghu Raman, who was the second blind man, and the question was same. The question was, how does an elephant look like? So now Raghu Raman said, mine is not a singular experience as that of Shekhar, and I experience it frequently. His awkward answer surprised the interviewer, and so he said, what does that mean? I frequently dream of elephants. The interviewer's curiosity increased, and so he said, how do you see dreams? He was surprised to hear from the blind man, Raghu Raman, that how can a blind man have dreams, let alone an elephant? So he again went into detail and asked again, so how can you see things and dreams without light? On the complicated question of the interviewer, Raghu Raman replied, why should there be light in a room? There means, according to him, according to Raghu Raman, there is no requirement of light in a room. Finally, Raghu Raman explained, if you could enter the space where I have dreams, you would also see the heart of elephant. This is all I can say, as I am not good in storytelling. Sorry. So now he wanted to stop. Now it was the turn of Chandran, who was the third blind man, and Chandran was the guide. So now the interviewer turned to Chandran, and the question, he asked the same question, and the question was, how does an elephant look like? So on the question, Chandran replied to the same question of the interviewer, I too love elephants. I know all the elephant sculptures in the temple. with all their details and nuances. He even remembers having touched an elephant once. He was fond of elephants, so he wanted to have one of his own. He satisfied his mind by getting a tattoo made of an elephant. So when the narrator saw the tattoo, it shocked and surprised him. Later on, after the interview, the interviewer, left the three blind men's room and went into his room and realized that the three blind men had their own interpretations based on their experiences. Some of the descriptions were far from the truth, and some of them were true, but only to the three blind men. He thought, being a person with good eyesight, knew well what an elephant looks like and how could it be in his room. The narrator realized that even though there was no light in the room of the blind men, they described the elephant according to their own imagination and interpretation. So, the perception and explanation of a thing differs from person to person. Although all the three people were blind, they described the elephant in different perspectives on the basis of their imagination. So finally, I can say that this story has an implied meaning which conveys a deeper meaning and can be interpreted in various ways. The key theme conveys that people have their own perceptions about the same thing. The writer clearly states that people may be true what they tell, but their truth may not reflect the whole truth. Means when perceptions differ, each person believes that his view is true and may not be convinced otherwise. In some particular situation, the perspectives are true, but it depends on the person from which angle he or she is looking at things. So overall, writer इस शॉर्ट स्टोरी में यही कहना चाह रहा है कि किसी भी चीज को अगर हम डिस्क्राइब करने के लिए बोल दे कुछ लोगों को, तो एक ही चीज को लोग अलग अलग तरीके से डिस्क्राइब करेंगे, क्योंकि लोगों का परसेप्शन डिफर करता है। वो अपने परसेप्शन के अकॉर्डिंग, अपने एक्सपीरियंस के अकॉर्डिंग किसी भी चीज़ को वो डिस्क्राइब करेंगे। जैसे कि थ्री ब्लाइंड मैन है, एलिफेंट को अलग अलग तरीके से अपने परसेप्शन, अपने इमेजिनेशन के बेस पे डिस्क्राइब किया। उसी तरह सपोज हम मान लेते हैं कि अगर हमारे सामने तीन लोग हैं, तीन कैटेगरी के लोग को हम लेते हैं, एक क्रिमिनल है, एक ऑनेस्ट पर्सन है और एक ओल्ड मैन है। तीन तरह के लोगों को लिया, और अगर हम इन तीनों को हम लाइफ को डिफाइन करने के लिए कहते हैं, तो क्या आपको लगता है यह तीनों लाइफ को एक ही तरह से डिफाइन कर पाएंगे? नो, नेवर। क्योंकि क्रिमिनल के लिए क्या है, क्राइम करना एक कॉमन थिंग है। यह एथिक्स ऑफ ह्यूमन लाइफ के बारे में यह कभी नहीं सोचेगा। इसके लिए क्राइम करना बहुत ही आम बात है। यह मोरालिटी और इमोरालिटी के बारे में कभी नहीं सोचेगा। सेकेंड पर्सन जो ऑनेस्ट है, सेम इसके अपोजिट है। उसके लिए छोटी से छोटी मिस्टेक करना उसे लगता है यह गलत है, हमें नहीं करना चाहिए। कोई भी क्राइम करना उसे लगता है यह एक सिन है। अब हम थर्ड पर्सन की बात करते हैं, ओल्ड मैन। उसे अगर हम कहते हैं लाइफ को डिफाइन करने के लिए, तो वह क्या है, वह पूरे लाइफ को जी लिया है, वह बूढ़ा इंसान, और क्या है, लाइफ के पेन और प्लेजर को एक्सपीरियंस कर चुका है, इसलिए वह लाइफ को अलग ढंग से डिफाइन करेगा। तो इसी तरह से लाइफ का परसेप्शन और जो इमेजिनेशन है, ये तीनों कैटेगरी के लोगों के नज़र में अलग अलग होगा। इस वजह से इनका इंटरप्रिटेशन भी डिफर करेगा। सो दैट इज all what the writer is trying to say in this short story. Thanks for today. We meet in the next class.